My wife's best friend bet her I'd cry when they served me divorce papers on Christmas. Men are so pathetic, she laughed. I signed immediately, then handed them a wrapped present they'll never forget. My name is Dr. David Miller. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 25 years, I've been a cardiothoracic surgeon at Chicago Memorial Hospital. I've performed over 3,000 heart surgeries, saved more lives than I can count, and built a reputation where other surgeons seek my consultation on their most difficult cases. When insurance companies need expert testimony, when medical boards require peer review, when families need someone to explain the unexplainable, they call me. Standing in my own dining room, listening to my wife Sarah and her best friend Jessica laugh about my anticipated humiliation, I realized that none of my professional accomplishments mattered to the two women who were about to destroy my marriage for sport. I'd overheard their conversation 3 days earlier, completely by accident. I'd returned home early from a conference in Detroit. My flight bumped up due to weather concerns. The house was supposed to be empty. Sarah had mentioned staying late at her yoga studio, something about inventory and year-end planning. Instead, I found Jessica's BMW in our driveway and voices coming from the kitchen. I'd entered through the garage, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug Sarah had insisted on. The voices carried clearly through the open kitchen doorway. "So, you think he'll actually cry?" Jessica was saying, her tone suggesting this was the most entertaining thing she'd discussed all year. "Oh, definitely," Sarah replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "David's not built for confrontation. He'll probably offer to go to counseling, maybe promise to change. You know how men get when they're desperate." "That's exactly why I bet you he'd beg. They always do. Remember when Tom found out about my thing with the tennis instructor? Pathetic." I stood frozen in the hallway, my medical bag still in my hand, as my wife of 15 years discussed my predicted emotional breakdown with the enthusiasm of someone planning a dinner party. "The timing is perfect," Sarah continued. "Christmas dinner, family around, maximum impact. He won't be able to make a scene with everyone watching." "And you're sure the papers are ready?" "Filed yesterday. Jessica, I can't thank you enough for connecting me with Marcus. He's been incredible." Marcus, a name I didn't recognize, delivered with the kind of breathless quality that told me everything I needed to know about Sarah's recent yoga sessions. I backed out the way I'd come, drove around the block twice, then returned home 20 minutes later, calling out my arrival like any normal evening. Sarah greeted me with a kiss that now felt like betrayal, asked about my conference with the kind of attentive interest that I suddenly realized was performance. For 3 days, I watched my wife prepare for what she clearly believed would be the defining moment of my humiliation. She was unusually solicitous, asking about my schedule, ensuring I'd be home for Christmas dinner, even suggesting we invite a few extra people to make it more festive. I agreed to everything, playing the role of the oblivious husband, while my mind worked through the implications of what I'd learned. The thing about being a surgeon is that you develop certain skills over time. Pattern recognition, for instance. The ability to see connections that others miss. Attention to detail that can mean the difference between life and death. And perhaps most importantly, the capacity to remain calm under extreme pressure while making decisions that will have permanent consequences. I'd always applied these skills professionally, but I'd never needed to use them to investigate my own wife. It took me exactly 18 hours to piece together the full scope of Sarah's deception. First, I called Dr. Rebecca Chen, a colleague who ran the hospital's STD clinic. Rebecca and I had known each other since residency, had worked on dozens of cases together. When I mentioned I needed a confidential consultation about a patient, she didn't ask questions. "Jessica Morrison," I said, reading from the notes I'd compiled. "Late 30s, insurance through her husband's law firm. Would have been treated approximately 6 months ago." Rebecca's expression tightened as she pulled up the records. "David, you know I can't—" "Rebecca, I'm not asking for clinical details. I just need to know if she was treated for something that would require partner notification." She studied the screen for a long moment. If this person were hypothetically treated for a condition that required contact tracing, yes, that would be accurate. Chlamydia, then, treatable but requiring disclosure to sexual partners. Jessica had been hiding her diagnosis from her husband Richard, which meant she'd been hiding her affair as well. Next, I drove to Sarah's yoga studio. Namaste Wellness occupied a converted warehouse in Lincoln Park, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. The evening classes were in session, soft music drifting through the building. Marcus Delacroix's photography studio occupied the space next door. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:30, Sarah emerged from the yoga studio, but instead of heading to her car, she walked directly to the photography studio's entrance. Through the large windows, I could see her greeting a tall man with the kind of carefully maintained stubble that suggested he spent more time on his appearance than most of my surgical residents spent on their technique. I didn't need to see more. I drove home, poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 18, and began planning my response. The next morning, I called in a favor from Dr. James Morrison, one of the best divorce attorneys in Chicago, and, coincidentally, no relation to Jessica despite the shared surname. James and I had worked together on several medical malpractice cases where his clients needed expert testimony. "David, you're the last person I'd expect to need a divorce attorney," he said, when I explained why I was calling. "That makes 2 of us. I need this handled quietly, James, very quietly." "What are we talking about? Asset protection? Custody issues?" "Both, potentially. But first, I need you to verify something about our prenuptial agreement." Sarah and I had signed a prenup at her insistence, back when she was worried about protecting her trust fund from what she then called my student loan debt. The irony wasn't lost on me that the document she'd demanded to protect her assets would now protect mine. "Adultery clause is clear," James confirmed after reviewing the paperwork. "Documented infidelity voids spousal support and reverts all shared assets to their original ownership. You'll keep the house, the investments, everything you brought into the marriage. And if she's pregnant? From the affair? That actually strengthens your position, proves the infidelity, eliminates any question about paternity. Why?" I explained what I'd observed at the yoga studio, the timeline of Sarah's recent behavior, the careful planning that had gone into arranging Christmas dinner as the venue for serving divorce papers. "She's playing chess while thinking you're playing checkers," James said, "except she doesn't realize you've been watching the board." "That's about right." "David, what do you want to do about this? We could file first, beat her to the punch." "No. I want to let her have her moment. Let her think she's won. Then I want to show her exactly what kind of game she's been playing." The Christmas dinner was Sarah's masterpiece of orchestration. She'd invited my parents, her sister Ellen with her husband, and of course, Jessica. 8 people around our dining table, enough of an audience to ensure maximum impact, but not so many that it would feel like a circus. I arrived home from the hospital at 6, having spent the day performing a routine valve replacement on a 63-year-old teacher whose family had waited 8 hours for news. Normal day, normal surgery, normal life, except for the knowledge that in 2 hours, my marriage would officially end. Sarah greeted me with unusual warmth, helped me out of my coat, poured me a glass of wine I didn't want, but accepted anyway. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon, every surface decorated with the precision of someone who'd been planning this evening for weeks. "How was surgery?" she asked. The same question she'd asked after thousands of my operations. "Successful. Mrs. Patterson will be home by New Year's." "That's wonderful. She's lucky to have you." The words felt like lines from a play we'd both memorized but no longer believed in. Dinner proceeded exactly as Sarah had orchestrated. My parents shared stories from their recent trip to Ireland. Ellen and David discussed their plans to remodel their kitchen. Jessica regaled us with tales from her latest business trip to San Francisco, carefully omitting any mention of her recent medical treatments. I played my part perfectly. The dedicated surgeon relaxing with his family, enjoying the holiday, completely unaware that his wife had spent weeks planning his public humiliation. At 9 o'clock, just as Sarah was serving dessert, Jessica cleared her throat. Actually, before we have pie, Sarah has something she wants to share with everyone. Sarah's face flushed, but not with embarrassment, with excitement. This was her moment, the culmination of whatever fantasy she'd constructed about her dramatic exit from our marriage. David, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, I know this is unusual timing, but I think it's important to be honest with family. She produced an envelope from beneath her napkin, legal-sized and official-looking. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our marriage, about what I want from my life. I've decided it's time for us to move in different directions. The envelope landed in front of me with the soft thud of expensive paper. Everyone at the table stared as I opened it, pulled out the divorce papers, and began reading. Take your time, Jessica said with barely concealed glee. I know it's a lot to process. I read through the papers methodically, the way I read surgical consent forms. Every word, every clause, every implication. Sarah had done her homework. The filing was comprehensive, professional, clearly prepared by someone who knew what they were doing. When I finished reading, I set the papers down and looked at my wife. She was watching me with the expression of someone waiting for a reaction she'd already scripted in her mind. Well? She said finally. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew my pen, the same Mont Blanc I'd used to sign surgical consent forms for the past decade. Without a word, I signed both copies of the divorce papers, dated them, and slid them back across the table. Thank you, I said calmly. This saves me a difficult conversation. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disappointment, and finally, something approaching panic. This wasn't the script she'd written. That's it? Jessica stammered. Should there be more? I mean, don't you want to talk about it? Fight for your marriage? I smiled, the kind of professional smile I used when explaining surgical outcomes to worried families. Jessica, 15 years of marriage doesn't end with a conversation over Christmas dinner. This has obviously been planned for some time. Sarah's made her choice. I respect that. I stood up and walked to the hall closet, returning with 2 wrapped packages I'd placed there earlier in the evening. Since we're exchanging gifts, I said, placing one package in front of Sarah and the other in front of Jessica, I have something for both of you. Sarah's package was larger, rectangular, wrapped in silver paper with a gold bow. Jessica's was smaller, square, wrapped in red with white ribbon. David, my mother said uncertainly, maybe this isn't the right time. Actually, Mom, I think it's perfect timing. Jessica opened hers first, tearing through the wrapping with the eagerness of someone who expected compensation for her role in the evening's drama. Inside was a medical folder, the kind I used for patient consultations. She opened it and her face went white. What is it? Richard asked, leaning over to see. Medical records, I said helpfully. Jessica was treated for chlamydia 6 months ago at Chicago Memorial's STD clinic. Since it's a sexually transmitted infection requiring partner notification, I thought Richard should know. As should your children, given that household transmission is possible. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't. This is confidential medical information. Actually, as a consulting physician and given the public health implications, I'm legally obligated to ensure proper contact tracing when the patient fails to notify their partners. I've already sent copies to your family doctor and, of course, to Richard's physician for appropriate testing. Richard was reading over the documents, his face cycling through confusion, understanding, and fury. 6 months ago? When you were in San Francisco for that conference? Oh, there's more, I continued conversationally. The clinic requires detailed contact tracing. Jessica provided quite a comprehensive list of partners. Apparently, she's been busy. Now all eyes turned to Sarah, whose package remained unopened in front of her. Her hands trembled as she untied the gold bow. Inside was a larger folder, this one containing photographs. "Your Christmas present?" I said as she stared at the first image. "Though technically, I suppose it's a present you already gave yourself." The photographs were professional quality, beautifully lit, artistically composed. They showed Sarah in Marcus's studio, progressing from a romantic portrait session to increasingly intimate poses, and finally to images that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "These are from your photo session 3 weeks ago," I explained to the horrified table. "The one you told me was a Christmas surprise for me. Very thoughtful, actually. Most wives just get their husband's ties." Sarah was flipping through the photographs with mounting horror. The final images in the series showed her and Marcus in passionate embraces, kissing, hands exploring, the camera capturing every moment of their affair. "You hired a photographer?" Ellen said numbly. "To take pictures of yourself? With another man?" "Oh, it gets better," I said. "Sarah, why don't you tell everyone about Marcus's business model?" Sarah couldn't speak. She was staring at a photograph of herself and Marcus locked in an embrace that left no room for interpretation. "No? Allow me. Marcus specializes in what he calls liberation photography. He helps unhappy wives document their affairs while planning their divorces. Very entrepreneurial. He gets the photography fee, plus a percentage of the divorce settlement, plus ongoing revenue from the relationship. Quite clever, really." I pulled out my phone and showed the table a banking app. The interesting thing is, Marcus was quite willing to sell me these photographs. $50,000, exactly the amount I needed for my mother's heart surgery next month, which isn't fully covered by insurance. He transferred full rights to the images and agreed to never contact Sarah again. Amazing how quickly love dies when money is involved. My mother gasped. "David, you didn't—" "Mom, your surgery is scheduled for January 15th. Dr. Rodriguez is the best cardiac surgeon on the West Coast. This little drama just paid for your procedure." The room erupted in voices. Richard shouting at Jessica, Ellen demanding explanations from Sarah, my father asking about the surgery I'd never told him about. In the chaos, only Sarah remained silent, staring at the photographs of her affair. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. "Sarah, you hired Marcus to take photos as a gift for me, then ended up having an affair with him. He saw an opportunity and convinced you to leave me so you could be together. Except he was never planning to be with you long term. He was planning to take whatever money you got from the divorce and move on to his next client." "But he loves me. I'm pregnant with his baby." "No, you're pregnant with his business plan. Which, incidentally, isn't worth much now that the adultery clause in our prenup has been triggered. You'll get nothing from our divorce, and Marcus just took $50,000 to disappear from your life permanently." Sarah's hands moved instinctively to her stomach. "He wouldn't. We're having a baby." "Sarah, I'm a doctor. I've seen this scenario more times than I care to count. Predators target vulnerable women, convince them to blow up their lives, then disappear once the money stops flowing. You were never his girlfriend. You were his business plan." The divorce papers she'd served with such fanfare now represented her complete financial ruin. The photographs she'd thought would be a romantic gesture had become evidence of adultery that voided every protection she'd thought she had. "The prenup you insisted on signing?" I continued gently. "The one you said would protect your trust fund from my student loans? Turns out it protects my assets from your affairs. Funny how these things work out." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Richard filed for divorce from Jessica within the week, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting full custody of their children based on Jessica's documented infidelity and failure to disclose sexually transmitted infections. The medical records I'd provided became evidence in his case. Sarah moved out of our house 3 days after Christmas, taking only her personal belongings. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. Adultery voided her claim to any marital assets, including the house, the investment accounts, and the savings I'd accumulated over 15 years of surgical practice. Marcus, true to our agreement, vanished completely. His photography studio closed within 2 weeks, his lease abandoned, his business phone disconnected. Sarah tried calling him for days before accepting that the man she'd thought loved her had simply been a professional who'd completed his transaction. The $50,000 he'd paid me was transferred directly to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, covering my mother's surgery and post-operative care. Dr. Rodriguez performed the procedure flawlessly, and Mom was home in time for Valentine's Day. Sarah's pregnancy proceeded normally, though she faced it alone. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her parents, was seeing a counselor, and working as a substitute teacher while preparing for single motherhood. I felt no satisfaction in her circumstances, just a profound sadness that 15 years of marriage had ended in such calculated betrayal. Jessica's marriage didn't survive the revelations. Richard's divorce was granted on grounds of adultery, and he received primary custody of their 2 children. Jessica moved to Phoenix, where she worked for her brother's real estate company and tried to rebuild a life that didn't include the social status she'd enjoyed as a prominent attorney's wife. 6 months after the Christmas dinner that ended my marriage, I received a letter from Sarah. It was brief, handwritten on simple stationery, and delivered to my office at the hospital. "David," it read, "I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what Marcus was doing. You tried to warn me, even after everything I'd done to hurt you. I'll never forgive myself for throwing away our marriage for someone who saw me as a business opportunity. I hope someday you can find happiness with someone who deserves you. Sarah." I read it twice, then filed it away in my desk drawer. Not because I was considering reconciliation, but because it represented something rare in my profession: a complete diagnosis and acknowledgement of the problem. 9 months after Christmas dinner, Sarah gave birth to a daughter she named Emma. I learned this from my mother, who somehow maintained contact with Sarah's mother, despite everything that had happened. The baby was healthy, Sarah was managing as a single parent, and life was moving forward for everyone involved. As for me, I threw myself back into my work with renewed focus. The surgery I'd funded with Marcus's money saved my mother's life, and watching her recovery reminded me why I'd become a doctor in the beginning. Not for the money or the status, but for the satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. A year later, I was asked to consult on a case at Northwestern Memorial, a complex valve replacement on a 43-year-old teacher who'd suffered complications from a childhood heart defect. The consulting cardiologist was Dr. Amanda Richardson, a brilliant surgeon who'd trained at Johns Hopkins and had recently relocated to Chicago from Boston. We worked together for 3 days, planning the surgery, coordinating the approach, ensuring every detail was perfect. Amanda was everything Sarah hadn't been: professional, competent, direct in her communication, respectful of expertise. On the 3rd day, as we reviewed the final surgical plan, she asked if I'd like to get coffee and discuss a research project she was developing on valve replacement outcomes. "Just coffee?" I asked. "Just coffee," she confirmed. "Though I should mention, I'm recently divorced, and my ex-husband was an investment banker who thought surgery was something other people did for a living." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "Coffee sounds perfect." Sometimes, I reflected as we walked to the hospital cafeteria, the best surgery is the one that removes diseased tissue completely, allowing healthy growth to take its place. My marriage to Sarah had been diseased for longer than I'd wanted to admit, infected by resentment, manipulation, and fundamental disrespect. The Christmas dinner that was supposed to humiliate me had instead performed the most successful surgery of my career: the complete removal of people who saw my profession as boring, my dedication as weakness, and my trust as something to be exploited. 6 months later, Amanda and I were married in a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, surrounded by colleagues who understood that healing required both skill and patience. My mother, fully recovered from her surgery, served as my best man in all but title, walking me down the aisle with the same pride she'd shown when I graduated medical school. On our wedding night, Amanda looked at me across the dinner table at our reception and said, "You know what I love most about marrying a surgeon?" "What's that?" "I know that when you commit to something, you follow through completely. No half measures, no cutting corners, no giving up when things get complicated." She was right. In surgery, as in life, you either do the job right or you don't do it at all. Sarah had taught me that some relationships, like some patients, can't be saved no matter how skilled the surgeon. But Amanda had taught me that sometimes, the best surgery is the one that makes room for something better to grow. 3 years later, when our son was born, I held him in the same hands that had saved my mother's life and ended my first marriage. His birth certificate listed his father as Dr. David Miller, cardiac surgeon, and his mother as Dr. Amanda Richardson Miller, cardiac surgeon. We were building something that would last, something based on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of professional competence that can't be faked or manipulated or destroyed by people who mistake kindness for weakness. Sometimes the best Christmas present is discovering exactly what you're worth and finding someone who agrees with your assessment.